point that finger somewhere else, old man. Around here, data speaks, not ghosts from the past.
Funny thing about the past, Lieutenant, it is the only reason your aircraft—
You missed it, the old man said quietly, his voice barely rising above the low hum of generators, yet it cut through the noise like a blade through still air. No one turned at first. No one needed to. The assumption had already been made. He was just another bystander, another relic drawn to the edge of something he didn't understand. The crash site stretched across the dry Nevada training range like a scar in the earth, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows over the twisted silhouette of the downed helicopter. The rotor blades were frozen at an unnatural angle, one edge buried in the dust, the other pointing toward a sky that offered no answers. Heat shimmered above the metal, distorting the air, while a ring of personnel moved with controlled urgency, voices clipped, efficient, detached. At the center of it all stood Lieutenant Daniel Brooks, clipboard in hand, posture sharp, eyes fixed on the data tablet glowing in front of him. "We've already run the playback 3 times, he said, not looking up, his tone edged with impatience. "There's nothing there." A few feet away, Kyle Mercer crouched beside a portable console, scrolling through lines of diagnostic output, the green text reflecting faintly in his sunglasses. Flight systems were clean. No warnings, no anomalies. If something failed, it didn't leave a trace. The words hung in the air, clinical and confident, the kind of certainty that came from trusting machines more than memory. Behind the perimeter tape, the old man stood alone, hands tucked into the pockets of a worn canvas jacket that had seen more years than anyone on that field. His name was Elias Vorn, though no one had asked. His hair was white, cut short, his face lined not just with age but with something deeper, something carved by time and distance. He watched the wreckage not like a spectator, but like someone listening to a conversation no one else could hear. A young security airman stepped in front of him, palm raised. "Sir, this is a restricted investigation area. I'm going to have to ask you to step back." Elias didn't move. His eyes remained on the helicopter, steady, unblinking. "You're looking in the wrong place," he said, almost to himself. The airman frowned, glancing back toward the officers as if hoping someone else would handle it. "Sir, I need you to comply." That was when Brooks finally looked up. His gaze swept over Elias in a single, dismissive pass, taking in the old jacket, the scuffed boots, the absence of any visible rank or insignia. The conclusion was immediate. "We're good here," Brooks said, his voice carrying just enough authority to close the matter. "Sir, please step away. This is an active military investigation." Elias shifted his weight slightly, the gravel crunching under his boots, a small sound that seemed louder than it should have been. "You're playing the recording," he said, eyes still fixed on the wreckage, "but you're not hearing it." Mercer let out a short laugh, shaking his head as he stood. "We've got advanced audio analysis running on that black box, old-timer. Filters, frequency mapping, the works. If there was something to hear, we'd have heard it." A few nearby technicians smirked, the tension easing just enough for arrogance to slip in. To them, he was out of place, out of time, a ghost wandering into a system that had no category for him. Elias finally turned his head, his pale eyes meeting Brooks for the first time. There was no challenge in them, no anger, just a quiet certainty that felt strangely out of proportion to the man himself. "Play the last 7 seconds," he said. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Mercer shrugged, tapping the console with a casual flick of his finger. "Sure," he said, his tone light, almost amused. "Let's see what 7 seconds we all somehow missed." The recording began to load, the faint static crackle rising into the dry desert air, unnoticed by most, dismissed before it even finished playing, but Elias didn't blink, didn't shift, didn't breathe any differently, because to him, those 7 seconds were already speaking, and they were telling a story no machine had learned how to understand. The recording did not sound remarkable at first, just a thin layer of static beneath the steady mechanical rhythm of rotor blades, the kind of audio every technician on that field had already dismissed as routine, archived, explained away, but Elias Vorn stood completely still as it played, his head slightly tilted, as if the desert wind itself had shifted direction and only he could feel it, while around him the team continued moving with quiet confidence, boots pressing into the dust, radios crackling, data scrolling across glowing screens. And when the playback ended, Mercer exhaled through his nose with a faint smirk, tapping the console again as if to emphasize the point. "That is it," he said, gesturing toward the waveform. "No spike, no distortion, no signal drop. Everything is clean." Lieutenant Brooks nodded once, satisfied, already turning his attention back to the broader investigation, because to him the case was not about what could not be seen, it was about what could be proven, measured, documented, and filed. But Elias did not move, his gaze still fixed on the silent console as if the sound had not actually ended for him. "Play it again," he said, his voice steady, carrying just enough weight to make Carter glance up from the edge of the perimeter. Mercer let out a short laugh, not cruel, just certain. "We have replayed it more times than I can count," he replied. "It does not change." A few of the technicians nearby nodded, their confidence reinforced by repetition, by the idea that enough analysis eventually becomes truth, but Elias took a small step forward, just enough for the gravel to shift under his boot, a subtle sound that seemed to draw more attention than it should have. "It does not need to change," he said. "You just have to hear the part that matters." Brooks exhaled slowly, the patience in his posture beginning to thin, and he glanced at Mercer as if weighing whether to entertain this any further, because there was a rhythm to command, a structure, and allowing an unknown civilian to interrupt that structure was not something he had been trained to do. "Fine," Brooks said finally, his tone controlled but firm. "One more time." Mercer shrugged and tapped the playback again, the audio rolling back, the faint hiss of static returning, followed by the steady rotation of blades captured in sound, a pattern so consistent it almost faded into the background. But Elias closed his eyes this time, not out of hesitation, but focus, as if removing sight allowed him to listen deeper, and Carter felt something shift in that moment, something he could not explain, a subtle tension in the air that did not match the casual dismissal around him. The recording continued, second by second, each rotation blending into the next, until Elias raised his hand slightly, not dramatically, just enough to mark a moment. "There," he said quietly. Mercer frowned, leaning closer to the console. "There what?" he asked, scrubbing the timeline back a fraction of a second, isolating the segment Elias had indicated. The sound repeated, identical to every previous pass, at least to the untrained ear, but Elias opened his eyes and looked directly at the waveform, not as data, but as memory. "That hesitation," he said. "It is late." Mercer shook his head almost immediately. "There is no hesitation. The timing is consistent with intolerance." Brooks folded his arms, his expression tightening. "Our systems would flag any delay outside operational limits," he added. Elias did not argue, did not raise his voice, he simply nodded once, as if acknowledging their confidence without accepting it. "Your systems are listening for failure," he said. "I am listening for what comes before it." The words settled into the space between them, quiet but heavy, and Carter felt that unease again, stronger now, because the old man was not guessing, he was remembering something, something precise, something practiced, and for the first time since the investigation began, the certainty that had filled the air began to thin, just enough for doubt to slip through. The silence that followed was not loud, but it lingered, stretching just long enough to make the technicians shift their weight and glance at one another, as if something subtle had slipped out of alignment without anyone clearly seeing it, and Mercer straightened up slowly, his earlier confidence tightening into something sharper, more defensive, because uncertainty was not something he tolerated well inside his domain. "You are hearing patterns that are not there," he said, his tone controlled but edged now, no longer amused. "That recording has been processed through 3 separate analysis systems. If there was any irregularity, it would have been flagged." Elias did not respond immediately. He looked past the console, past the cluster of personnel, back toward the wreckage itself, where the twisted frame of the helicopter sat under the fading sun, its shadow stretching longer across the dry ground. "Your systems are consistent," he said quietly. "But the aircraft was not." Brooks stepped closer now, the gravel crunching under his boots, his posture firm, his presence unmistakably that of command reasserting itself. "That is enough," he said, his voice calm but final. "This is not a discussion. We are conducting a formal investigation using verified data and certified procedures. You are interfering with that process." The words were not shouted, but they carried weight, and several of the nearby airmen straightened instinctively, the atmosphere snapping back toward order, toward hierarchy, toward control. Mercer nodded once, reassured, and gestured toward the perimeter. "Sir, we are done here," he added, looking directly at Elias now. "You need to step back." For a moment, it seemed like the moment would end there, like the system would close around itself again and push the anomaly out, but Elias did not argue, did not resist, he simply looked at Brooks with that same steady expression, the kind that did not challenge authority but did not yield to it either. "Then your report will say it failed without warning," he said. "And it will be wrong." The statement landed heavier than anything he had said before, not because of its volume, but because of its certainty, and Mercer let out a short breath, shaking his head as if dismissing it, but the edge of irritation had deepened into something more personal now. "We are not guessing," Mercer replied. "We are working with data." Elias gave a small nod, acknowledging the distinction. "Data tells you what happened," he said. "Sound tells you why." Brooks' jaw tightened slightly, a subtle shift that Carter noticed from where he stood at the edge of the scene, half in the role of observer, half in something else he could not quite define, because there was something about the old man that did not fit any category he had been trained to recognize, and that alone made the situation feel unstable. "Sir," Brooks said again, more firmly now, "step away from the equipment." Elias held his gaze for a brief second longer, then turned without protest, taking a slow step back toward the perimeter, the movement deliberate, controlled, as if he had already said everything he needed to say. The tension seemed to release slightly as he moved, the technicians returning their attention to the consoles, the investigation resuming its structured rhythm, but Carter did not move. His eyes stayed on Elias, watching the way he stopped just beyond the tape, the way he did not leave, the way his attention remained fixed on the helicopter as if the conversation was not over for him. Carter hesitated, then glanced back at Mercer's console, at the waveform still frozen on the screen, and something about it no longer looked as complete as it had before. He took a small step closer to the table, careful not to draw attention, and leaned in just enough to study the segment Elias had pointed out, the faint shift in timing that Mercer had dismissed, and for the first time he allowed himself to listen not as a technician, but as something else, something less certain but more open, and as the seconds played again in his mind, he felt a flicker of doubt settle into place, quiet but persistent, like a question that refused to go away. The operation resumed its rhythm, but it was no longer as steady as it had been before. Something small had shifted beneath the surface, something that could not be measured on a screen or logged into a report, and Airman First Class Leo Carter felt it more clearly with each passing second as he stood near the console, his eyes tracing the frozen waveform again. The faint irregularity Elias had pointed out now refusing to disappear no matter how many times he told himself it was nothing, just noise, just coincidence, just a trick of perception, but the doubt remained, quiet and persistent, and it pushed him forward before he had fully decided to move. He reached toward the console, hesitating for just a fraction of a second before pressing the playback key again, the sound filling his ears through the small headset, isolating him from the rest of the field, and this time he did not listen for failure the way he had been trained, he listened for difference, for anything that did not belong, and there it was again, subtle, almost invisible, a fraction of a second where the rhythm did not align perfectly with itself, a delay so slight it could be dismissed, but not ignored once noticed. Carter pulled the headset back slowly, his heart beating a little faster than it should have for something so small, and he glanced over his shoulder toward Elias, who still stood beyond the tape, unmoving, watching the wreckage as if the outcome had already been decided long before anyone else arrived. "Sergeant," Carter said quietly, stepping toward Mercer, careful not to draw too much attention, "can I isolate a segment for closer review?" Mercer barely looked up, still focused on his screen. "You already have the full analysis," he replied. There is nothing new to find. Carter swallowed, then tried again, keeping his voice steady. Just a manual check. It will take a minute. Mercer sighed, clearly irritated now, but waved a hand in a brief gesture of permission. Fine. 1 minute. Carter nodded and turned back to the console, pulling up the audio track and zooming into the exact point Elias had marked, stretching the waveform across the screen until each fraction of a second became visible, each tiny variation exposed, and the more he looked, the more the pattern began to separate from the assumption of perfection. Brooks noticed the shift in activity and stepped closer, his expression tightening as he watched Carter work. "What are you doing?" he asked. Carter did not look up immediately. "Just verifying a timing alignment, sir," he answered. Brooks crossed his arms, his posture firm. "We already verified it." Carter nodded once, but his eyes stayed on the screen. "Yes, sir." The seconds ticked by, the sun dipping lower, the shadows stretching further across the ground, and Carter adjusted the playback speed, slowing it down, isolating the sound, breaking it apart until the steady rhythm of the rotor became a series of individual pulses, each one distinct, each one measurable, and then it appeared again, clearer now, undeniable. A slight lag between two rotations that did not match the sequence before it. Carter leaned in closer, his breath steady but focused, and replayed it again, and again, each time confirming the same subtle deviation. "That is not consistent," he murmured under his breath, more to himself than anyone else, but Brooks heard it, and the words hung in the air just long enough to matter. "What did you say?" Brooks asked, stepping closer. Carter finally looked up, his expression no longer uncertain, but not fully confident either, caught somewhere in between. "There is a delay," he said. "Very small, but it is there." Mercer turned sharply now, his attention pulled away from his own screen. "That is within tolerance," he said quickly. "It does not indicate a failure." Carter hesitated, then shook his head slightly. "It does not match the previous rotations," he replied. "It is not random." The conversation drew the attention of those nearby, the quiet murmur of activity slowing as more eyes turned toward the console, and beyond the tape, Elias Vaughan did not move. But his gaze shifted slightly, not toward the people, but toward the sound itself, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment, the point where doubt became recognition, and recognition became something that could no longer be dismissed. The air around the console tightened as the words settled in, not loud, not dramatic, but precise enough to fracture the certainty that had held the investigation together, and Mercer stepped forward quickly, his movements sharper now, his tone no longer patient but controlled in a way that masked irritation just beneath the surface. "You are misreading the data," he said, leaning over Carter's shoulder, his eyes scanning the waveform with practiced speed, searching not for truth, but for confirmation of what he already believed. "Minor deviations happen. Environmental interference, recording artifacts, sensor noise. It does not mean anything." Carter did not pull back, but he did not argue either, his gaze steady on the screen as he replayed the segment again, slower this time, isolating each rotation, each pulse, until the pattern revealed itself not as noise, but as a break in rhythm, subtle but deliberate, like a skipped beat that did not belong. "It repeats," Carter said quietly. "Same delay, same position." Brooks stepped closer, his presence now fully engaged, the weight of command shifting from dismissal to scrutiny. "Show me," he said. Carter nodded and adjusted the playback, aligning the sequences side by side, the waveform stretching across the screen like a map of something no one had wanted to see, and as the sound played again, even without training, even without expectation, the difference could be felt, not just heard, a slight hesitation that did not match the rotations before or after it. Mercer exhaled slowly, his jaw tightening as he watched it, and for the first time since the old man had spoken, he did not immediately dismiss it. "That still falls within operational tolerance," he said, but there was less certainty in his voice now, less edge, more calculation. Carter shook his head slightly. "Tolerance assumes random variation," he replied. "This is not random." The distinction hung there, quiet but sharp, and Brooks' eyes narrowed slightly as he considered it, his gaze shifting briefly toward the wreckage, then back to the screen, as if trying to reconcile two versions of the same event that no longer aligned. If it is not random, Brooks said. Slowly, then what is it? Carter hesitated, just for a moment, then glanced past them toward the perimeter, toward the old man who had not moved, who had not spoken again, who had simply waited. He said it was late, Carter answered. Mercer followed his gaze, his expression tightening again, but this time not with dismissal, but resistance, as if acknowledging the implication would mean surrendering control of the narrative. We are not basing this investigation on speculation, Mercer said firmly. We rely on verified systems, not instinct. Brooks remained silent for a moment longer, his posture rigid, his thoughts moving behind a controlled expression, and then he turned his head slightly, just enough to look toward Elias Vaughan standing beyond the tape. The distance between them was only a few yards, but it felt larger now, defined not by space, but by the line between what was known and what was not. Elias met his gaze without hesitation, without challenge, simply present, as if the outcome of this moment had already been decided somewhere long before the crash, long before the investigation, long before any of them had arrived. The wind moved lightly across the field, carrying dust and the faint scent of heated metal, and for the first time, Brooks did not look away immediately. He held the moment, weighing it, measuring it against everything he had been trained to trust, and then he turned back to the console. "Run it again," he said. Mercer did not respond right away, but after a brief pause, he reached for the controls and restarted the playback, the sound rising once more into the quiet air, no longer dismissed, no longer background, but something else now, something closer to a question, and as the seconds passed and the delay revealed itself again, subtle but undeniable, the structure of certainty that had defined the investigation began to shift, not collapsing, not breaking, but bending just enough to allow something new to enter, something that did not come from the system, but from a man standing outside of it, waiting for them to finally hear what he had already understood. The sound rolled again across the dry air, no longer ignored, no longer dismissed, and this time no one spoke while it played, not Mercer, not Brooks, not even the technicians who had filled the space earlier with quiet certainty, because the hesitation was there now for all of them, not obvious, not dramatic, but present, like a faint echo that did not belong to the original voice, and as the final second faded into silence, the weight of it lingered, pressing into the space between them. Brooks kept his eyes on the console for a moment longer, his expression unreadable, then slowly turned his head toward the perimeter again. "Bring him in," he said. The words were simple, but they carried a shift in authority that no one missed. Mercer hesitated, just briefly, as if the decision itself challenged something internal, then nodded once to the airman at the tape. "Let him through." The barrier lifted without ceremony, and Elias Vaughan stepped forward, his pace unhurried, each step measured, the gravel crunching softly beneath his boots as he crossed into the center of the investigation, not as an outsider now, but not fully as an insider either, something in between, something undefined. He stopped a few feet from the console, close enough to hear, close enough to see, but he did not reach for anything, did not touch the equipment, as if he understood the boundary without needing to be told. Brooks watched him for a second, then gestured lightly toward the console. "You said it was late," he said. "Explain." Elias looked at the screen, not at the data itself, but at the shape of it, the rhythm captured in visual form, and for a moment he said nothing, as if aligning what he saw with something older, something stored far deeper than any system could access. "That rotor is not failing," he said quietly. "It is falling behind." Mercer frowned immediately. "That is not a recognized failure mode," he replied. Elias nodded once. "Because it does not show up as a failure at first," he said. "It shows up as timing." Carter leaned slightly closer, listening carefully now, not as a technician, but as a student of something he did not yet understand. "Timing of what?" he asked. Elias shifted his gaze briefly toward him, then back to the waveform. "The tail rotor," he said. "It is not matching the main rotation. It is compensating too late." Mercer shook his head, already pulling up additional data on his tablet. The synchronization logs show no deviation, he said. Everything is within acceptable parameters. Elias did not argue. He simply pointed, not touching the screen, but indicating the exact moment. There, he said. That delay is small, but it repeats. It means the system is correcting after the fact, not with it. Brooks' eyes narrowed slightly. And what does that lead to? He asked. Elias took a slow breath, his posture unchanged, his voice steady. Loss of control that does not look like loss of control, he said. The pilot would feel it as drift, not failure. By the time it becomes visible, it is already too late to correct smoothly. The words settled into the group, not as speculation, but as explanation, and Mercer's fingers paused over his tablet, the data in front of him suddenly incomplete, not wrong, but insufficient. Carter looked back at the waveform, then at Elias, then back again, the connection forming in his mind piece by piece. So the system never flagged it, Carter said slowly, because it never crossed the failure threshold. Elias nodded. It stayed just inside the line, he said. Until it did not. The wind moved across the field again, lighter now as the sun dipped lower, casting the wreckage into deeper shadow, and for the first time since the investigation began, the silence that followed was not uncertainty, but recognition, quiet, controlled, and undeniable, because what they were looking at was no longer just data, it was a pattern they had not known how to see, and the man standing in front of them had seen it the moment he heard it. The realization did not arrive with noise or reaction, it settled in slowly, like a weight redistributing itself across the room, and for a moment no one moved, no one spoke, as if the entire investigation had paused to recalibrate around a truth that had not come from any system they trusted. Mercer was the first to break the stillness, but not with dismissal this time, his voice lower, more measured, as he turned back to his tablet and began pulling up deeper system logs, layers that had not been considered relevant before. If what you are saying is accurate, he said, his eyes scanning rapidly, then the correction loop would not trigger an alert, because it would still be within operational bounds. Elias gave a small nod, not as agreement, but as confirmation. It would look stable, he said. Right until it is not. Brooks shifted his stance. Slightly, his posture still firm but no longer closed, the rigid certainty replaced by something more deliberate, more attentive, and he stepped closer to the console, his eyes now following the data instead of dismissing it. Can we verify this? He asked. Mercer did not answer immediately, his fingers moving across the screen, pulling up synchronization data, cross-referencing timing logs against the audio waveform, and for the first time, the system began to show something different, not an error, not a failure, but a pattern that did not align perfectly with itself. There is a micro-delay, Mercer said slowly, almost reluctantly, as if each word had to pass through resistance before being spoken. It is consistent across the final sequence. Carter felt a quiet tension release inside him, not relief, but recognition, the kind that comes when uncertainty becomes something real, something that can be pointed to, measured, acknowledged. Brooks looked from the tablet to Elias again, his expression sharpening. How did you catch it? He asked. Elias did not hesitate. It is not in the numbers, he said. It is in the rhythm. The answer was simple, but it carried something deeper, something that did not fit neatly into any report or system, and Mercer glanced at him again, this time without the earlier skepticism, but with a kind of reluctant curiosity. You heard that from a single playback, Mercer said. Elias shrugged slightly. Not the first time I have heard it, he replied. The words lingered, quiet but heavy, and Carter's eyes narrowed slightly as he tried to place them, because that was not the kind of statement someone made casually, not in a place like this, not about something this specific. Brooks caught it too, his attention sharpening further. What do you mean, not the first time? He asked. Elias looked past them for a moment, not at the wreckage, not at the sky, but somewhere further back, somewhere that did not exist on that field, and when he spoke again, his voice was the same, steady, controlled, but carrying a trace of something older. Different aircraft, he said. Same problem. Mercer straightened slightly, his posture shifting as the implication settled in. "You are saying this has happened before," he said. Elias nodded once. "It starts small," he replied. "Always does. Small enough that no one flags it. Small enough that it passes every check." Brooks' jaw tightened slightly. "And then?" he asked. Elias looked at him directly now, his eyes clear, unwavering. "Then it does not stay small." The wind moved across the field again, carrying dust in low drifting lines, and the wreckage behind them seemed quieter now, not because anything had changed, but because they were finally seeing it differently, not as a machine that had failed without warning, but as one that had been giving signals all along, signals no one had known how to hear. Mercer lowered his tablet slowly, the data still open in front of him, but no longer complete on its own, and Brooks took a slow breath, his gaze shifting once more between the screen and the man standing in front of him, because the investigation had crossed a line now, from analysis into something else, something that required more than systems, more than procedures. "We are going to escalate this," Brooks said finally, his voice steady, decisive. "Command needs to see this immediately." Carter felt the weight of those words settle across the group, because escalation meant scrutiny, and scrutiny meant answers would be demanded, not just from the data, but from the people interpreting it, and as Brooks reached for his radio, Elias Bourne did not move, did not speak, he simply stood there, as if he had been waiting for this exact moment, the point where the system finally admitted it did not have all the answers. The call went out quickly, clipped and precise, the way it always did when something moved beyond routine, and within minutes the controlled rhythm of the investigation shifted again, not into chaos, but into a sharper kind of order, one that carried weight from somewhere higher up the chain, and the low hum of vehicles approaching across the dry field signaled that the situation had already reached ears that mattered. Carter stepped back slightly from the console, giving space as Brooks lowered the radio, his posture now set, his earlier certainty replaced by something more deliberate, more measured, while Mercer remained near the screen, his tablet still in hand, but his attention no longer locked on it alone, his eyes flicking occasionally toward Elias as if recalibrating how to place him within the structure he trusted. The wind shifted again, carrying a faint ripple across the scattered debris, and then the vehicles arrived, dark shapes cutting across the open ground before slowing near the perimeter, doors opening with controlled urgency, boots hitting the dust in a rhythm that did not need to be loud to command attention. Conversations faded without instruction, heads turning, posture straightening, and Brooks stepped forward instinctively, meeting the incoming group halfway, his voice low as he began a rapid summary, his words precise, structured, but the shift in his tone made it clear that this was no longer a routine report. The senior officer who stepped out front did not speak immediately, his presence alone enough to quiet the space, his eyes scanning the scene once, then settling on Brooks, listening without interruption as the explanation unfolded, from the initial findings to the anomaly in the recording, to the pattern that had not been recognized until moments ago. When Brooks finished, there was a brief pause, not hesitation, but consideration, and then the officer's gaze moved past him, directly to Elias Bourne standing a few yards away, still, composed, unchanged by the arrival of authority. "Play it," the officer said. No one questioned the instruction. Mercer moved immediately, bringing up the segment, his movements efficient but now carrying a trace of tension that had not been there before, and the recording began again, the now familiar sequence filling the quiet air, every person present listening in a way they had not before, not for confirmation, but for understanding. The seconds passed, the rhythm steady, until the hesitation revealed itself once more, subtle but undeniable, and this time it did not pass unnoticed by anyone. The officer did not react outwardly, but his eyes narrowed slightly, his focus sharpening as the final second faded. "Again," he said. Mercer complied without a word, replaying the segment, isolating the moment, and this time the officer stepped closer to the console, his attention fixed, his posture still, absorbing not just the sound, but the pattern behind it. Then he looked up, not at Brooks, not at Mercer, but at Elias. "You identified this," he said. It was not a question. Elias nodded once. The officer held his gaze for a brief moment longer, then turned slightly, addressing no one and everyone at once. "This is not a standard deviation," he said. This is a precursor. The word settled heavily across the group, carrying implications that extended far beyond the crash site, and Mercer's grip on his tablet tightened slightly as the data in front of him shifted from explanation to warning. Brooks remained still, absorbing the statement, while Carter felt the weight of it settle into place, the earlier doubt now fully replaced by something else, something closer to realization. The officer looked back at the console one more time, then gave a small, decisive nod. "We escalate this immediately," he said. "Full review, all units." His gaze moved once more to Elias, steady, assessing, no longer dismissive, no longer uncertain. "And we are going to listen to everything the old man has to say." The field did not return to noise after that, it settled into something quieter, something heavier, as if every movement now carried awareness, and the investigation that had begun as a search for answers had become something else entirely, something closer to understanding, and at the center of it all, Elias Bourne remained exactly as he had been from the start, still, composed, untouched by the shift that had changed everyone else. The officer stood beside the console a moment longer, then turned slightly toward him, his posture no longer distant, no longer guarded, but deliberate, respectful in a way that did not need to be spoken. "Walk me through it," he said. Elias nodded once, stepping closer to the console, not hesitating now, his presence accepted without question, and he gestured lightly toward the waveform, his finger stopping just short of touching the screen. "It begins here," he said, his voice steady, measured, as if he were not explaining something new, but recalling something already known. "The tail rotor starts to lag, just enough that the system compensates after the rotation, not with it." Mercer watched closely, his earlier resistance gone, replaced by focus, his tablet lowered at his side, no longer leading the process but following it. "The correction masks the delay," Elias continued. "It keeps everything within tolerance, but it builds, cycle by cycle." Brooks stood just behind them, his arms no longer crossed, his stance open, listening without interruption, his role shifted from authority to witness. Carter leaned slightly forward, absorbing every word, the pattern now clear in his mind, not just as data, but as motion, as timing, as something alive within the machine. "So it never fails suddenly," Carter said quietly. Elias shook his head. "Nothing like this ever does," he replied. "It drifts first. Small. Enough to ignore. Small enough to pass every check." The officer's gaze remained fixed on the screen, but his attention was deeper now, connecting the explanation to the broader implication. "And the pilot?" he asked. Elias' eyes moved briefly toward the wreckage, then back. "Feels it before the system sees it," he said. "But by then, the margin is already gone." The word settled into the space with a quiet finality, not dramatic, not heavy with emotion, but precise, and in that precision was something more powerful than any reaction, because it left no room for doubt. Mercer exhaled slowly, his grip on the tablet loosening as the data in front of him rearranged itself into something incomplete without this perspective. "We never flagged it," he said, almost to himself. Elias gave a slight nod. "You were not listening for it," he replied. No one argued. No one needed to. The truth of it was already there, in the recording, in the pattern, in the way everything now made sense in a way it had not before. The sun had dipped lower now, casting the field in a deeper amber light, the wreckage silhouetted against the horizon, no longer just a broken machine, but a final point in a sequence that had begun long before impact, long before anyone had thought to look for it. The officer straightened slightly, his decision already made. "We adjust protocols," he said. "We look for this pattern across all units." He paused, then added, his voice steady, certain, "and we do not ignore it again." His gaze shifted back to Elias, holding there for a moment, not as an evaluation, but as acknowledgement. "You saved us from missing it twice," he said. Elias did not respond with pride or dismissal. He simply gave a small nod, as if the statement did not belong to him alone, but to something larger, something carried over time. The wind moved softly across the field once more, lifting a thin layer of dust that drifted briefly before settling again, and the silence that followed was not empty, it was full, not with questions, but with understanding, because the answer had never been hidden, it had only required someone who knew how to hear it. Somewhere behind them, the recording sat ready to play again, unchanged, the same 7 seconds, the same pattern, but it was no longer the same to those who had heard it now, and as the investigation continued, it did so on a different foundation, one built not just on systems and data, but on something quieter, something older, something that did not need to prove itself to be true. Some men do not read the data, they remember the sound.